Hello Husky people, here's my 449 engine. Today I'm going to be replacing the stator. Unfortunately I had my flywheel bolts, this is a new flywheel, and one of these little Allen key flywheel screws came out. It was a known problem, it's my own fault, I left them too long. I Loctited them, fresh Loctite on them at about 120 hours, and now at nearly 240 hours one has come loose and it ate up the stator windings. So I've bought a new stator and flywheel kit and I'll be changing that today. Now what I've done first is I've got my new flywheel, and as you can see I've pulled the bolts out of it. What I will be doing, that's a trick we use in mining for some of our mining gear, is that I've undone the one-way clutch off the back. This is the one-way clutch driver for the flywheel that the starter motor runs. I've undone it, and I will clean up any oil from these flat surfaces here, and I'm going to use a hard setting gasket agent from Loctite called 510, and that will set a hard plastic like bonding between the one-way clutch and the flywheel itself. I will then use clean up these original screws. I've actually bought heavy duty screws from my local bolt shop. They have a higher head, so if I've got clearance for those I'll use them. I'll pre-assemble it with those in. If not, I will reapply fresh high strength Loctite to the original screws and reuse those and monitor them. I'd suggest perhaps 50 hours would be good, every 50 hours. 100 might be safe. Beyond that you're running in unknown territory. There's quite a few people, myself included now, who've had failures. It's a $300 or $400 Australian deal and a pain in the arse to get after the fact when you need one in a hurry. The dealers don't have them, they have to order them in. They're still available but not on the shelf usually. So yeah, I'll go ahead and do all that and yeah, show you how we change it. I am very fortunate in that I have a ex-dealer friend who has the factory pullers, and he's been able to ship them over to me. He's only a few hours away and he's put them on a courier for me, so I've got the correct pullers. And I've also gone ahead and bought myself a little blowtorch kit to heat up the flywheel. It recommends 80 degrees as the release temperature for the flywheel, so we'll have to go ahead and do that as well. So here we go, crack on into it. Now I need to clean up these sealing faces, or these mounting faces. What I do need to do is pull out the one-way clutch. That tin over there, one-way clutch bearing, it just slides up out of there. You need to keep all dirt away from it, so I'm going to put it on the clean stator, which is fresh out of the box. Now I've got some broken parts cleaner. Spray the surfaces, the mating surfaces, and give them a wipe with a clean rag. Make sure they're completely free of all oil. While I'm there, I'm also going to have a bit of a squirt down the flywheel holes on the other piece. So these are the threaded holes that the flywheel bolts hold onto, and I want to make them free of oil too for when I reassemble. So make all the surfaces free from oil. We'll re-oil, once it's together, re-oil the one-way clutch surface. You can see this small step that the lip of the one-way clutch sits into when it reassembles. So if you've got it in on this side, it's incorrect. It holds in or stays in place by this lip retaining it into the second section there. Righto, so this is the product that I mentioned. I've a monster tube that I've, let's say, hired from work. I'm going to run a thin bead mostly around the outside of the bolts here. I don't want to get too much of it on the inside section here. I don't want any squeezing into where the one-way clutch is going to be. Anything that doesn't get excluded from air will stay soft and pliable, so I don't want that washing around the bearing. I want it to remain underneath the working face. Now if you look it up, it is a flange sealer gasket eliminator. It is to replace gaskets on hard surfaces, but once set it's a very hard plastic like surface. and you won't. The main reason I want to do that is I'm trying to eliminate any lateral play this way, so as the motor fires and returns, if the bolts come loose, it won't chatter backward and forward. I'm trying to stop any movement, any slight movement in the bolt holes. So like I said before, it's a trick that we use in mining for mounting large machine surfaces together. If we don't want them to move laterally on one another, we'll use some of that. Obviously use it for sealing as well, but it's yeah, difficult to remove. You will be able to break it up away from there, but you won't be able to peel it sideways. So yeah, quite a good product. So I'll go ahead and put some of that on. You can see my very thin bead there. What I'm going to do now is to make the two surfaces together, and I just want to work that around so that it's spread evenly. I'm also looking inside here for any, there's nothing come into the surface where the one-way clutch is going to bond. I will take an Allen key and wipe out any of these other holes here just to get any excess out of those. Wiping it away on a rag. These four outer holes here are what hold the magnet set aligned when they bonded in. So I'm happy with this half. I'll just recover any of the excess out of the threaded holes in the other piece. Fit my one-way bearing lip up down into the one-way clutch housing. Now if I hold a couple of fingers on that, I can hold it upside down, drop it into place over where the bolt holes are. Okay, so I'll turn the assembly up the other way. For now I don't need it in a vise, I can support it just by letting it rest on the one-way clutch, and I can, there's another little bit of excess, very sticky magnets. Bit of excess in these holes, clear that out. And then set about using my thread locker on the bolts. Now, as I said, I will pre-assemble them with the bolts dry to make sure I've got clearance. My longer headed bolts, you can see the difference in the two heads. Now, the reason I've done that is that the machining for the Allen key in the centre of the factory ones actually carries down into the shank of the bolt. So if you imagine looking down inside here that it's machined down inside there, it doesn't leave a whole lot of bolt left in the head, and I believe that they're stretching. So all of the Allen key pressing is contained within the head here, and then there's a separate section before the thread starts. So my hope is I can use those. They're still grade 10.9 high tensile bolts, good quality ones. These are supposed to be grade 10.9 as well, but I don't believe that the heads are up to standard. Either that or the factory dry pre-fitted Loctite style thread locker is one or the other. Either the heads pull or the Loctite isn't up to grade. Whatever the case, the factory system doesn't work, so hence I've pulled apart a brand new part to improve it. Removing the last of the bolts here from the cover. Obviously you can do this on the bike. You basically just have to take off the gear shift lever. If you have a size 14 front sprocket like I do, you're able to just get the chain up just enough to get it out. If you've got the original size 15 sprocket, you'll need to remove the sprocket first. Bit of a pain, but yeah, there you go. So there's a lifting tab here, another grip point here, and you can get a screwdriver in under the back here. Incidentally, you need to make make sure it's clean all the way around. You don't want to drop any dirt in there, obviously. And you've got the big magnet of the stator fighting you and a couple of dowels, so you need to come off straight and level, top and bottom, end to end. Make sure that you come off level, otherwise you risk damaging the housing. Hear that lifting then. Just drop my lever. You can see how it wants to fight back in again. It's got quite a strong magnet on that stator. I'm lifting here as well. Get my hand under that front section and we're off. Righto. Now, all of the times that I've taken this off, you can actually see the damage there. My ride home has actually continued more damage on there on the stator, which I wasn't aware of. So yeah, not only is the single bolt that fell out and done all the damage wrecked it, it's actually done more damage since then, which I wasn't aware of. So there you go. So almost always the gasket will be reusable. I have bought a new one. This is the third time this one's been off, so I won't reuse it again, but I'll keep it as an emergency spare. And also this, just clean my fingers up, this idler gear more often than not seems to come out in the case with its shaft. They just push in, so before putting it back together they need to be back in place, shaft seated at its full depth. Otherwise when you're trying to go back on, you're trying to line all that up and you actually risk damaging. If it's misaligned and you do the bolts up, it'll crack the case. So you can see the heavy damage there to the stator. With some luck I might be able to get that rewound and someone can have it as a spare, and I'll see about the flywheel whether that's usable or not. Doesn't look like it will be at the moment. So yeah, so I need to change over the pickup, just these two bolts here, and the stator itself, these two inner bolts. Loctite them in place, put a little bit of sealer where the wiring harness comes out of the case. Yeah, so basically the new part, I've checked already that it's the same on the plugs, and a bolt in a fair. So yeah, I'll go ahead and change that over. Got my 18mm socket and electric rattle gun. Sorry about the loud noise. Just going to rattle the flywheel nut off. Keep it in my parts tray. And I have my crank nut off now, and as I mentioned before, this is our factory puller, and the spigot that sits over the tip of the crank, that's to protect the end of the crankshaft. Now in our PDF files we have a listing for a crank puller that fits, I believe it's a Kawasaki KX110 from memory, but it has this internal, I think 28mm thread from memory, that will thread over the boss here on the flywheel. What it doesn't have is this spigot to protect the end of the crank, so if you use it, it may, well, will probably spread the end of the crank here and damage the crank. What can you do? If you had a spare 6mm threaded bolt lying around, drop it inside. You may want to even drill a small divot in the top. This one has one. This is one of the cover bolts. I won't use that, but yeah, if it's a pointed bolt on the puller, it would push into the top of the bolt, and the bolt would help spread the load over the tip of the crank, and that should save it from any damage. You can see the little recess cut into this one here. This one actually has a ball bearing in the end of it. It's quite a well made puller. Puller is in place. Large spanner, wrench, shifter, whatever you want to call it. 17mm spanner on the end. Now I want to put a bit of load onto the tip of the crank, but that's not going to pull it off. It's on a taper down the bottom here, and the release temperature, you heat the flywheel, it expands slightly, and then the weight of this puller pulling on it should pop it off. So As you can see right at the moment, nice warm day here in Queensland, 27 degrees, 26 degrees, so I'll get the, that's Celsius by the way, I'll get the gas torch on it and warm it up, and so yeah, I'll put just a little bit more load there, just get a bit of weight on it, so maybe 100 Newton meters or something on it, maybe not quite, but not with that spanner. Get a bit of heat on it and it should pop off. So we're at temperature there now. Can't find my friggin' spanner. We're at temperature there now. Right, I have managed to get it off. I had to use quite a bit more heat than suggested, and had to have 3 goes at it, but yeah, it's off. I wouldn't suggest using the flywheel again afterwards, as it's been hot enough to damage the plastic behind it. So flywheel is a one-time fit unit by the look of that. What I did do when I ordered my flywheel is I also ordered a new key for here. There's nothing wrong with the old one, doesn't look to be worn or damaged, hasn't been loose, but just as a precaution, a couple of bucks while I had the order online finger out ordering, so yeah, I threw it in there. What I will do is carefully wash any debris out of the bottom of the case here. There's not much there, most of it's been trapped in the flywheel thankfully, but yeah, anything that's there I'll get rid of. So you can see here is a gear train from the starter motor. The starter winds this gear here, goes through these idlers and turns this smooth boss here on the back. That boss there fits inside the one-way clutch and drives the stator plate, that one that we glued before, which then drives back through into the crankshaft. So you can see all of these gears revolve around on a bearing separate to the crankshaft, and then the one-way clutch puts it into the flywheel and drives it back into the flywheel. So the motor can start, all these gears will come to rest, and the flywheel can run independently with the one-way clutch spinning. I'll pick up the flywheel, show you again. That's the one-way clutch affair there, which is quite hot still. And yeah, so one thing to check is that there's no excessive wear on this face here. It looks relatively smooth and shiny, so yep, we're good to go. So yeah, I'll clean everything up and get it ready to assemble. I've taken the bolts out of the stator and the ignition pickup. That simply lifts out of place. The stator lifts up. Now normally there's a little tab that holds this wiring loom still underneath. Normally, you know, obviously that wouldn't look like that, and really I'm not entirely sure that the stator rewinding guys will be able to do much with that, but I'll send it and see. You never know, someone might be in need of one day and I'll have one. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, being careful not to introduce anything into the bearing, I'll clean up everything in this case, make sure it's all nice and shiny inside, clean up in the motor, fit my new parts, and away we go again. As you go back together with the new stator, this is the old one, there's this metal finger. Now it fits down in the centre here, like so, the flat part against the face of the stator housing. What you'll need to do, as I've just done now, is to smooth the three wires that are inside, one all beside each other, so that the wiring loom ends up flat like that. If they're crossed over and you bolt it down, then they may pinch on one another, so you need to smooth them out, make them flat. Was a bit tricky, but I got there. Tease them up flat, make it all flat back about that far, an inch or so, maybe 30-40 millimeters, so maybe an inch and a half. Keep the loom pinched like that, insert the stator, and then put your metal tab in on top of the wires, and you'll feel that it seats down all the way to the housing. So place it in over top of the loom. Confirm that the loom is free. It's got some free movement, it's not pinched in there. You can see that just down in there it's bottomed out in the bottom of the housing there, and now when I put the ignition pickup on top, that will hold it down in place after I line it up straight. We're in place there now, so I can just sit my bolts in there loosely until I Loctite them in place. I've just got one holding it. I'll Loctite the other one and insert it. So the ignition pickup holds down the metal plate that we installed at the bottom there. Hopefully you can see it in the light. My stator wiring is not pinched. I've just got the stator on loose at the moment, and I can actually move it by gently pulling on the wires, so that confirms it's not pinched. Then I'll put some sealer on this rubber boot. I'll tuck these wires down out of the way, put some sealer on the boot, and then Loctite all my bolts, and I'm ready to go. Incidentally, there's a spacer here behind, or sitting on top of the bearing. It's a matched spacer, it's the same on both sides, but it must be in place when you put the stator back on. It's just a spacing ring that keeps the bearing in place, sits out against the stator itself and sets the height. So that's the only other trick there. So high strength Loctite on my bolts, bolt it all back together, done, ready to put the cover or put the flywheel back on, and the cover's ready to go once that's done. There's our stator cover ready to go, Loctite it in, all wiring tucked down out of the way, and I will apply a little bit of silicone sealer behind this rubber boot area and on the front face of it before I bolt it to the motor. Otherwise that's now ready to go, so I'll wrap that in a rag, keep the dirt out of it, and get ready to put my new flywheel on. So I have my flywheel ready to go back on. Got my new key in. I've put some 680 high strength retaining compound Loctite on. The book calls for 638, I think it is, and I've gone and got the torque for the flywheel nut from my PDF manual. Now, introducing the flywheel onto the shaft, this one-way clutch makes it a bit tricky. The sprag doesn't want to bite on there. I've put a little bit of oil on it, so without disturbing my Loctite, fit the flywheel up. As you can see, I have my flywheel fitted now, and I've just done a trial fit with only 2 flywheel bolts in, little Allen key bolts, and they clear, with no gasket, they clear the cover. So I'm confident that there's enough clearance inside the stator area to clear my new taller bolts, or bolts with taller heads. Incidentally, for future purposes, the head is 6 millimeters high, so if you're looking for your own bolts, certainly be very wise to test them yourself. I take no responsibility for someone else's motor. In my engine, with my new stator, 6mm headed bolts clear. So yeah, definitely test them first. Make 100% certain that they're not going to hack into your new or your old stator if you're going to replace them, which is grade 10.9, 12mm long 6mm bolts are what you're after. Hex head bolts might work too, but you may have a little bit of trouble with socket clearance doing them up. It would depend on your socket set. So yeah, I will now Loctite all these in, bring them up to 25 Newton meters in steps, so around 3, a nip on each of the 6 and then a diamond pattern across them, doing them all up to 25 Newton meters with high strength thread locker. And yeah, that'll be my flywheel done. I can put my stator cover on and home and hosed. I have all my flywheel bolts in, they're torqued, nut is torqued, gasket surface is clean. Incidentally, this is a pressure port here, this is engine oil pressure into the cover. It lubes the bearing here on the nose of the crankshaft. I've got my brand new gasket, which I'm happy to put on dry. And it has a dowel here and another dowel here. The gasket comes with new ones, I haven't had to replace them. Got some silicone engine sealer on the tip of my finger. That's to put in behind my rubber grommet here for the wiring loom. So just a thin smear on there. I like grey because you can't see it very well on aluminium, doesn't look like anyone's been in there. And then a bit across the face of it as well, so it will bond to the motor. Again, that whole surface is clean. That's the oil port, and it comes out the back of this bearing here, so this case does have a small volume of oil which gets back to the sump. Now, as you go back on, the magnets will try and suck the cover away from you. You need to confirm that your idler shaft here is all the way home and the gear is in place and everything goes in straight and slips away from your fingers as it goes in, so just be careful. It's in place, and a couple of light taps to pop it onto the dowel. There we go, that's seated fully home. Now to replace the bolts, torque them up, and this side of the motor is now done, completed.